Hey everyone, it is Lisa Danforth and Christine O'Neill, and thank you for your patience with us jumping on. I was having some major technical difficulties. So my name is Lisa Danforth. I'm a business strategist and leadership vision coach, and I am here today to have a very important conversation that I think this week is especially important that we're discussing this and with Christine, which is great. So I just, before we sort of jump into all of that, I would love it if you don't mind if you would post in the chat box in the comment section where you're dialing in from, whether it's one of the social media platforms or a different state. Christine's dialing in from another state. She's traveling. We're both from Vermont. So if you could just pop in, that would be great. And Christine, because of the technical difficulties and I'm on my phone, I can't see the chat. So if you want to sort of let me know, that would be great, and I can speak up. So a little bit about, we've got one, let me back up for a second. I'm all shimmeled from from the energy of this week and the technical difficulties. So I just want to make a quick mention that next week I'll be interviewing Jen Fleckenstein from Clearwater Filtration. She's going to be talking about building a team and a culture. Super, everything's sort of tying together with all of this, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves as well as our team. So to introduce the fabulous Christine, Christine is I love your title, executive coach. Hold on. I'm going to slow down for just a minute here. I'm not usually this fishimal. Executive coach, clinician, and longtime mindfulness practitioner. Christine is passionate about helping overwhelmed professionals learn how to make a difference while having a life by using value-based prioritization. Absolutely love that, Christine. As well as neuroscience-informed self-coaching techniques, something that I think we can all use when things are great, especially right now. Christine specializes in professional burnout prevention, recovery, and executive coaching for people-centered leaders. Here's a fun little fact about Christine. She just bought a camper van and looks forward to visiting as many national parks and provincial parks in North America as possible. She took her new van, Libby, on a road trip. It's a beautiful van. How are you enjoying that?
I am loving it. It's been great.
Wonderful. So can you share a little bit more about yourself? I think the bio is great, but just share a little more, story about you, if you would.
Yes, I'd love to. But first I want to welcome Daniel, who's joining us via LinkedIn from Massachusetts. And we have Leora Dowling in South Burlington, Vermont, and Lindsay Lathrop Ryan, who is joining us from downstairs in the home that I'm in. So I'm visiting friends in Durham, North Carolina right now, and they're very generously hosting me, and Lindsay's letting me use her office. So thank you, Lindsay.
Wonderful.
So I am a longtime clinician. So I came to my current work from a place of having experienced burnout professionally multiple times, unfortunately, and feeling very frustrated with the solutions that were being offered. It didn't really resonate with what I felt was needed at the time. And I didn't have the framework, the language, and the understanding that I do now to understand why I chafed so much. In fact, it kind of pissed me off when
I like the honesty.
It really had nothing but honesty from me today. So, I was really frustrated with the idea that burnout was my problem because, I saw my colleagues all around just, high achievers, highly successful, very motivated, highly resilient individuals who were all really, many were really struggling. And so I got really interested in understanding it better. And that has actually brought me to where I am today, which is helping other people who really are looking to continue making a difference in the world, but are really struggling with feeling like they can continue to do the good work that they're doing because it's so depleting.
Incredibly depleting. And so today we're talking about burnout in the time of COVID, but let's talk a little bit about, we were chatting before we went live about that collective experience that's going on. It's not just COVID.
No, it's not just COVID. I mean, we all know that we're living in extremely unusual times. There's no time in modern history where we have simultaneously experienced a global pandemic, an economic crisis, We have, social injustice and a great deal of uh, unease, really. I mean, there's a sense of things simmering just below the surface, certainly in the US, but other places in the world as well. The fact that work has shifted significantly for many, many people around the world, with many more people working from home, if they in fact still have a job, unfortunately, many, many job losses, furloughs, layoffs, businesses closing. It's just, it's unprecedented. And I'm sorry, I'm just noticing someone's popping in, Christine Erickson, actually one of my former colleagues at the hospital I used to work at, saying cyber
attacks.
Yeah. It's like we can't catch a break, can't catch our breath. And that has just really resulted in this collective existential crisis, really, I think that many people are feeling. There's been, a breakdown of civil discourse. Fortunately, many relationships have been significantly impaired. And it's really hard to hold it together. I've been experiencing that, and I'm trained in managing my mind, so.
And I really appreciate you stating that, because I think so many people think that, we're home, we're safe, things are, we're healthy, we still have our job, that we don't have the right or the ability to be struggling. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how can people recognize either that fatigue or that burnout? Because it's more, I have seen a lot of people saying, well, I should be, happy.
Right. I should be happy. I should be grateful. And that's another thing that pisses me off. So here's the thing. So I have great respect and belief in the practices that are very useful for managing the mind, such as, meditation, gratitude practices. The problem is that when we are faced constantly with these stressors, it is very difficult to slow down and drop into a place of just stillness within. And there is a very real physiologic reason for that. And without attending to that, we cannot actually slow down enough to benefit from those practices. So, what's happening in our brains right now is we're constantly under threat. And it doesn't matter what your belief system is. This is just an extraordinarily stressful time for anyone with a conscience who is aware of what's happening in the world. And, we're ruled by our primitive brain. So just really high level, I probably would be helpful for me to just spend a little bit of time talking about what's happening neurochemically right now.
I think that would be great. Thank you.
So as humans evolved, we didn't develop this big prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning part of our brain, the logical part of our brain, until much later in human evolution. So we still have the primitive brain, which is referred to as the limbic system, or more colloquially as the lizard brain, which is the reactive. Yeah, it's the reactive part of the brain. It functions on emotion. It functions subconsciously much of the time, and it's on constant high alert, scanning our environment for any threat. It doesn't think as much as it reacts, and its sole purpose is to keep us safe. The problem is it developed during a time where we didn't have internet, where we didn't have constant input from devices, where we weren't constantly task switching, which is the actual phrase for multitasking, and basically going at top speed for 8 to 10 hours a day. It doesn't know what to do with everything that we're dealing with. And that was even before 2020. So you add on top of that these threats, some of which are tangible and real, and others of which are just sort of unknown, right? They're ambiguous. We fear what we don't know. And so that keeps us just constantly on edge. Mm-hmm. So our body is secreting cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which is very useful when we need it in short doses, but at consistent elevated levels has very deleterious impacts on the body, including on our immunity, which is not something that we want to have negatively impacted right now. adrenaline, the fight, flight, freeze reaction. So I know personally, I've just been feeling, very sort of jazzed up a lot of the time and some chest tightness. And, there are things that I've been trying to do to offset that, but it's been really challenging. So Leora says, the hard thing is when the coach burns out and we feel guilty about that because people are turning to us. Yeah, so for those of us who are in helping professions, coaches, therapists, healthcare providers, and others, it is hard. I think, Lisa, you and I are sitting up here, the title of this conversation, we're hoping to offer a solution, but unfortunately we're not the gurus because we're experiencing the same thing. We're not immune to it. So I've been going on for a while. It looked like you might have had a question for me.
No, I just want to highlight that even the most experienced people are struggling with this right now. And the thing is, when we're talking about when our amygdala is hijacked, right? Whether it's a stick on the ground or a real snake, our body chemically reacts to it. So when it's ambiguous, like you were saying, it's hard for us to notice it and recognize it, but also how do we deal with that?
That's right. Yeah. And, I became really interested in this at the beginning of the pandemic. So something about me is that I'm a bit of a pandemic nerd. When I was taking pre-med courses and I took microbiology, I just really nerded out on this idea that microbes, could have such an effect on the globe and global populations. And so I've always had like this idea that, we were going to have a global pandemic happen at some point. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. And so, when this past January rolled around and we started to see news reports coming out of China and then out of Europe, I think everybody was a little on edge, and I was too, but I thought I was managing it okay. I had this deep scientific interest in epidemiology and virology. And then I was asked to return to the hospital where I had formerly worked to help out in the emergency department with the COVID surge that we were having in Vermont. And the way I'm wired is, of course, I'm going to do that. That's, I truly believe my purpose is, on earth to help reduce suffering. And I had this clinical training and knowledge, and I was honored to be asked to come back and help out. What I didn't expect was the severe anxiety I quickly developed going into that environment. And I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. Here I was, a 35-year yoga and meditation practitioner, a professional certified coach, someone who has studied managing the mind and managing emotions for a long, long time. And I was feeling hijacked by the situation I was in. And I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language and the explanation to understand what was happening. Fortunately, a lot of people started writing about this in the lay press and a little bit in the scientific literature. And it helped me enormously to learn about a couple of concepts that I certainly was experiencing personally. And one of them was this sense of pre-traumatic stress and anticipatory
pre-traumatic
stress. So, post-traumatic stress is obviously is well described. It is a phenomenon that occurs, a mental health problem that occurs after people have been exposed to a significant traumatic event, whereby that trauma sort of, it can be refreshed and seem like it's happening in the moment rather than appropriately stored in the past. And it's accompanied often by hypervigilance, easily startled, emotional lability, so angering quickly, reacting quickly, and basically dysregulation of the emotions. It was also described, a similar phenomenon was described in soldiers pre-deployment before they were going off into areas of battle, whereby many of those same emotions and reactions were happening in anticipation of the trauma, but before it had happened. Now, there's no official diagnosis for that, but it has been observed. We were starting to see that in healthcare personnel. So frontline medical professionals were exhibiting that. And that's exactly what I was feeling. What happens is our brain.
Yes. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on what were you feeling? Because I think that emotion and the feeling that we need to recognize, because we tend to sort of push it down. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so emotion is felt in the body. And we often have this this separation point between, the logical thinking part of our head and what's going
Right.
on down here, when in fact, there is this constant connection between the two. And what I wasn't recognizing, what I was feeling was, my heart rate was up, sort of my baseline heart rate remained up. I wasn't sleeping well. I was imagining worst case scenarios. I had intrusive thoughts about my family getting sick, about me getting sick, about the people that I care deeply about dying without me being able to see them. And and that was what I was feeling personally. And then when I went into the care environment in the emergency department, it was this sense of not, especially back then, this was in April and May, we didn't know quite as much about the virus. We weren't, there was conflicting information about how to best treat people. And this sense of, I don't know how to help. I don't know if I can help. I'm feeling very powerless. And that just resulted in this deep sense of anxiety and helplessness. So those were the feelings and the emotions that I had. And the less sleep I was getting, the more anxious I was getting.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important to sort of point it out because we can quite easily ignore it. So thank you.
We certainly can. So it was helpful for me to understand these concepts. So, the reason that I'm imagining the worst case scenario is because my brain is trying to keep me alive. Like, once I understood that, I could manage it better. Once I understood the neuroscience behind what was happening, well, this is a natural reaction to multiple threats. At the time that I was in the emergency department, obviously the biggest one was fear of being infected and getting sick. Fear of my colleagues getting sick, fear of my family getting sick. And anticipatory grief was this other feeling that I had. So, we've all pretty much experienced grief, the loss of an important person in our life, the loss of a pet, this deep sense of darkness and sadness, and really having a hard time accessing, that there are good things in the world, and feeling like it's never going to be okay again. And there is this concept of anticipatory grief, whereby we are already grieving things that haven't happened yet. So you combine pre-traumatic stress, anticipatory grief, we are triggering our brain's desire for certainty. So one of the things that our brain craves most is knowing what the hell is going to happen in the future. And
not always easy to figure out.
We don't have right now is certainty, even in our current election. So, it's been helpful. I started talking about this with my colleagues in the hospital at the time that I was reading about it, and it really resonated with people. Like, okay, that's why we're freaking out and we're feeling inadequate and like we don't know how to handle ourselves and we can't manage. And, unfortunately, then we do things like maybe drink a little alcohol to help numb out those feelings. I found myself, scrolling nonstop on my phone, just trying to get more information, but really that was just distracting me from what was going on inside. I wasn't attending to what I needed to internally at that time.
And I find that when we do that, it really messes with our brain. Not just it's distracting us and we're not present, but it's really messing with our ability to be present in other situations that we're looking to get triggered and sort of moved away from that uncomfortable feeling. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about some of the tools that you've used when you recognize that feeling, you're putting words to the emotions, the feelings? What were some of the tools that you were able to utilize so that you could start gaining control a little bit more?
I think the first thing was acceptance. I'm a person who has spent my entire career trying to help solve people's problems, and just accepting that this was a problem that was much bigger than anything I could solve was a little bit helpful, just as a starting point. The other was recognizing that I needed to rest my body. So, I wasn't sleeping, and part of that was because I was just reading all night. I was just trying to get information about, how to treat COVID patients from our colleagues in Italy, who were in the middle of it, because there wasn't we didn't have any scientific literature or data or best practices or standards of care yet in the US. And I just was afraid that I was going to miss something important. So I just had to create some space between myself and that information that I was constantly inputting into my head and clearing the decks, if you will. I got outside and I walked. I hadn't been doing that. And, one of the most important things we can do to discharge some of that high, the energy, the emotion that's in our body, those elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels, is to actually just move. And it doesn't have to be, high impact work. It can just be walking or turning on your favorite tunes and cranking it out and dancing like a fool in your kitchen.
That's my favorite.
Especially with friends, if you have one that you can level with like I do right now. So just I call it getting the yayas out, because everything always feels a little bit better after you've done that. Outside, if it's safe and possible to get outside, and I recognize that it's not for everyone, then that's really important. There's something about the fresh air, hearing nature sounds, and just changing our visual input that can have really beneficial effects on us.
I am amazed when you can change the environment, how much just enough of a disruptor to get us thinking in a different way.
Yeah, it breaks that loop, doesn't it?
Definitely hard to break, but definitely, when we can look at the result that we want, it can pull us outside, right? Where we'd be saying, for me, I'm like, I'm just gonna have a cup of tea and just sit here, and that only adds to the frustration, the lack of, like we discussed before, control.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I just will add that one of the other things I did was I did dive back into some of my mind-body practices from yoga. I happened to be in another yoga teacher training when the pandemic happened, and I have to say that was serendipitous, because I really was able to dive into breathing, just slowing down my breath, taking full breaths and engaging my diaphragm. I could immediately feel things start to slow down. But I had to get through those first few layers of working out that anxious energy before I could even spend time inside my body. And that's, if I leave your listeners with anything, it's that you shouldn't feel bad if you're not meditating, because honestly, I just don't think that that's very accessible to most people right now, without doing something first to discharge our nervous energy.
Thank you for stating that. I think so many people are saying, meditate, slow down, breathe, and we're holding our breath, and our brain, like you said earlier, is just hijacked. So it's very difficult to do that. So thank you for sort of highlighting that, because I think it gives us, some of us need a bit of permission to be able to be like, meditation's just not happening right now, but what are some other tools that I could implement?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Will you share a bit about, overwhelm, and there's just so much overwhelm going on right now, whether, like you said, it's the election, whether it's COVID, just everything that's going on. Talk a little bit about that and how to, again, recognize, but also some tools to settle some of that overwhelm.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the key. There's nothing but overwhelm right now, and without getting that under control, we can't actually hope to feel a whole lot better. So one of the things I talk about in my work with my clients is the self-preserving no. So getting clear boundaries. And I know that's a topic of great interest of yours as well, and part of the work that you do with your clients. But it's getting really clear about what matters most. So, I know when things start swirling in my head and I'm just going a mile a minute, and my brain is just now looking for things to freak the hell out about, I need to just bring it back to basics and come back to, for me, my core values. So, what have I identified as the most important things in my life? And what the pandemic helped make very clear for me personally was that family and friends relationships really were where it's at. Without that, and our health personally. So my health and well-being, and then the people I care about and nurturing those relationships. Without that, I don't have anything. So when I start to lose track, I come back to that. And, you know, that's just been really hard in a pandemic where we're forced to physically distance from people, not being able to hug, not getting that oxytocin release in our brain that feels so good. That's the love hormone the neurochemical that gets released when we're loving or feeling connected to people.
That we need.
And we absolutely need it. I mean, you know, studies have showed people actually die if they don't have that. Babies die if they don't get that kind of contact, or babies don't thrive. Excuse me. So it is really hard to do those things, the common wisdom around, you know, how to reduce overwhelm, how to improve well-being, you know, self-care, which by the way is another 4-letter word to me.
I think of self-care is how we treat ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Whether that's what we think about ourselves and whatnot. So I agree with you. Self-care is sort of put out there, but it's so much more than.
Yeah. It's not getting a manicure. Yeah. It's actually creating boundaries and learning how to say no to things. So, you know, to answer your question about reducing overwhelm, you know, I just stop and I sit and I say, what is the most important thing for me to do today that aligns with what's most important to me and my personal mission statement for my life and what I need to be well. And then that gets done. And then I look at all the other things on my to-do list and I get rid of what doesn't need to happen. Because sorry, go ahead.
No, I love that. That, you know, gaining clarity on who you want to be, what's most important to you, prioritizing those, and what doesn't make that priority list is a distraction, right?
It is. And yet, so many of us are just always feeling like we have to do all the things, and giving ourselves permission to release those things that aren't actually going to matter is one of the hardest things to do and one of the most critical things to do in order to make ourselves well right now, or to at least approximate wellness.
Leora said, it's nice to get the permission piece, right? To have permission to slow down, to look at what the struggle is. And Lindsay says, such a great point. And also, Lindsay, I like this, and can you see if I can read this here? Self-care is how we treat ourselves. Oh, isn't it's so important to really look at how are we treating ourselves? And then not only how is that impacting our day and our energy, but how is that impacting the people around us? And I want to back up for a moment with what you were saying a few minutes ago with the need for, you know, that love, the connection. As a single person, my boys live out west. I'm not married. Can you speak to those of us who are living by ourselves? I know, you know, for me, I've gotten a lot of tools over the years. I've built a lot of tools, but I still struggle. But there are many people that I talk to that are home alone, always on virtual, and there's just this extra sort of, you know, hump to get over to start gaining clarity on the life that you want to live.
It's a really tough question to answer. You know, when people have animals, that's helpful. But if you're alone and your relationships are distant, you know, I think a lot of it is about creating that sense of, if you will, self-love. And I guess we can bring self-care in the positive way that you and I prefer to think about it, in terms of, you know, what are the things that bring delight to us, and, you know, those sort of more sensual physical practices. So whether it's, you know, taking a bath, listening to your favorite music, preparing like your favorite food and just slowing down and not eating it over the sink, but lighting a candle, you know, almost having a romance with yourself, as a way of trying to stimulate that feeling. And, you know, yeah, virtual is what we have, most of us right now. And so we have to make friends with it. One thing I've noticed is by coming off of Zoom and going to telephone without visual.
I was just thinking that same thing.
Say more about that.
For me, I get zoomed out. I mean, I am literally exhausted by the end of the day to stare straight forward, look into the camera. Where, you know, we're not normally looking at ourselves when we're having a conversation, so it completely distracts us. And there is such a thing as, I don't know if it's Zoom fatigue or, you know, just online fatigue. And for me, I've actually been asking friends, because they're always like, "Hey, let's jump on a Zoom." I'm like, "Can we jump on a phone call?" because I actually can hear more of what's going on, and I'm more present
Mhm.
on the phone, and I feel more connected to the person on the other end of the phone because I'm not staring at a screen, and it just feels virtual, which it is, right, when it's on a screen, but it's kind of old fashioned the way that it used to be a phone, well, cell phone.
It's so yeah, exactly. Not a corded phone.
Right.
Yeah, it is so interesting that getting more analog is more intimate in terms of our communication with one another. You're right. I think by extinguishing that visual sense, we are able to tune in more to the auditory. I think the other thing is if it's possible to have, physically distanced walks or meetups with people outside. If we are living alone, I think it's important to try to create that sense of community and connection in person if it's possible.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Leora says, the other thing I like about this discussion is that it's nice to know we're not alone, even if we live alone and like our own company. Absolutely, Leora, right? I mean, I can entertain myself like no one else. And I've always been someone who could stay in for 3 or 4 days and be totally fine with it. But it is exhausting. There's this fatigue that comes along with it. For me, what's really helped is I will admit I had about 2 or 3 weeks where I was genuinely struggling, like really having a hard time getting out of my own way, not being motivated or productive, which was a huge trigger for me. I'm like, okay, there's something going on. But it was to be, like you said, gain clarity and be more intentional on the outcome that I'm looking for, the connection that I'm looking for, even with myself, because I had disconnected from that feeling because it was uncomfortable.
Of course. Yeah, we want to avoid what doesn't feel comfortable. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I would, I think for those of us who are living alone, there are challenges. And I just want to also acknowledge the challenges from people who aren't living alone, who have forced proximity with many people that they are not used to having. And, for those people who also have children who are of school age and they're trying to manage so much right now, including suddenly being a teacher, trying to remain professional and do their work from home, creating space, not actually having alone time can be really challenging as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you talk a bit about some tools to take control when we are, there are a lot of people that are living in one household. I've had many of my friends be like, oh man, what I wouldn't give for a day by myself,
Right.
right? But what are some tools that you can help people who are completely overwhelmed with the kids coming in, just no space for themselves?
Mhm, mhm. I think what can be helpful for many people in that situation is creating intentional structure and rules and expectations around how we use space, how we use time. Obviously, every household circumstances are going to be a little bit different, but I think part of it is just really open communication. I think that's always the key to no matter whatever the conflict is or potential conflict. The more open and honest we are about what's going on and the reasons for what we need, the better we're going to be and the more likely that we are going to achieve our desired outcome. So it's not going to be perfect. It's hard to imagine a situation right now that's going to be perfect. And many of us are perfectionists. And so one of the permissions that I'd like to offer is just let it go, because the best we can do is just basically continue to survive until we achieve a new normal. Um, Actually, that's not the best. The best we can do is to thrive, but it's not real. It's not wrong to just have the objective of getting through the best we can and having that be okay. And giving ourselves, I think that self-care is that permission again to just, set the bar really low.
So I say lower that threshold a little
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah.
that if we're continually striving and not reaching it, it augments the lack thereof.
Exactly. I'm noticing Daniel writes, back when we were talking about dancing twice per week for multiple hours is a wonderful feeling. Highly recommend it. Couldn't agree more, Daniel. And Deb Pirelli, hi. There are other forms of meditation, including walking meditation, sensing the sights and smells in nature, bird watching, etc. I couldn't agree more, Deb. Just being aware of what's happening in our bodies, walking slowly, feeling the earth beneath our feet, feeling the air on our face, tuning into the sounds around us. I've just been in love with the birds lately, and feeling more of a sense of kinship with the other living beings on this earth. And that has helped keep me grounded as well.
One of the things that I do when I can find my brain going where I don't particularly want it to go is just something so simple. And I learned this from Shirzad Shamin, who wrote the book Positive Intelligence. I absolutely love the book. But it's simple little disruptive things like when you are having a repetitive thought going on and on, literally just stop and put your fingertips together and feel the ridges of your fingers, right? And just focus on that. Or like you said, focus on the birds. Just it's enough of a disruptor in those well-worn neural pathways to sort of get us out of that, definitely. And continuing with that, you were saying communication. Communication is the foundation for all relationships, including with ourselves. One thing I always like to say is give the gift of transparency. Right? Speak up and say what it is that you need and let the other person know what's going on, so that they can support you, or you know that you need to step it up a little bit more for yourself because you're just not going to get the support from the other person. Can you build on that communication conversation a little bit more? And I'd love your input on this. What I've seen is relationships as well as businesses that had solid communication skills are actually somewhat thriving right now. But the ones where the communication skills were lacking, or in the team communication at work was non-existent, are really struggling.
Absolutely, yes. And I think this has really sort of, shown a light on that type of organizational dysfunction, whereby, a transparent organization versus a non. And yeah, so, in the absence of information, our brain fills in the gaps with the story that it wants to believe. And that is a very dangerous thing, because it often, most likely, doesn't actually represent reality. So we then are off and running, creating our own feature film in our head about what is going on in any given circumstance that may or may not have any semblance of bearing on what actually is happening. We're not mind readers. So and our brain craves is this craving for certainty and having expectations that we can count on, right? We don't like not knowing. So it is, I think, one of the greatest gifts to others and to ourselves to be very honest and forthright with our communication. And unfortunately, most of us didn't learn to do that really well early in life.
I think we learn to not communicate, to quiet ourselves, to not step up. And I think that is an incredible disservice to ourselves and to our relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then the other thing that often comes into place in relationships, whether professional, organizational, or personal and intimate, is this sense of fairness, right? So if we're not talking to one another about what's going on, we often look at a situation and say, well, it's not fair that that's happening. That you get what you need and I don't. And then we, again, create this whole story in our heads about what's going on. Resentment builds up, and then, it comes to blows or not, or people just turn inward and just stop talking. And either one of those obviously is very damaging. So yeah, I think, what we all need is a masterclass on radical communication, and most of us haven't gotten that.
No, I find communication is where we fall down just far too often, and we don't even want to learn because it's so difficult to figure it out. We have our tools in our toolbox.
That's right. Well, one of the things I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
One of the things that I like to say to my clients, when we're sitting in discomfort because we're afraid to say something, it's almost certain that if we don't say the thing, we're not going to get our desired outcome. It's very unlikely that the universe will conspire to create the thing that we want to have happen, or the behavior that we would like to see in another person. So, I like to think this for myself. You can continue to sit with the discomfort of the circumstance that you're in now, knowing that it's unlikely to change, or you could take the risk of the discomfort of speaking up and saying it with a much higher likelihood of getting to where you want to get. And that takes a lot of courage, and it is worth it. And finding someone to talk to who can help you, work toward building that, whatever it is that you want to say. It can be very helpful to talk to a trusted friend, advisor, therapist, coach, to really get clear in our head about what it is that's not working for us, what it is that we need more of, what our unmet need is, and then figuring out how it is that we want to communicate that to the other person in a mutually respectful and loving way that's not attacky and coming from a place of what our need is and not what another person is doing or not doing. That one skill could really make a big difference in this world.
I was just on the phone with a young woman on Tuesday, on election day, and she was sharing with me how her parents had basically almost disowned her because of the way that she voted. I mean, she was truly, absolutely, genuinely fearful that she had ruined the relationship with them completely, which just hurts my heart to even say that out loud. One of the things I shared with her that I recommend to people is to say, I love you enough to have this difficult conversation, right? To bring that to the table. So it's kind of creating a safe space to explore. And that's often enough for someone to at least step forward and start, meet you halfway and start the conversation.
I think that's right. Brene Brown talks a lot about that. She calls that the rumble, right?
Oh, I love the rumble.
Mm-hmm. And I just love that idea. It's like, it's that vulnerability, being willing to step away from our strongly held position in our place of cognitive sureness, to be open to being with someone else and hold space for someone else who doesn't hold our beliefs. Listening to learn, listening to understand what's going on for that person. Because, what we find often is that we're actually not that far apart. So there's an underlying fear, if we want to use our current political situation right now, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, there's a fear that something is going to be lost. Mm-hmm. And fear of loss is an extraordinarily powerful fear that manifests in often unhelpful ways. So that's where I think we see these conflicts in families. We also don't want to believe that someone who we love and respect can feel so differently than we do. It kind of creates some cognitive dissonance within us, I think, and we don't want that to be the case. We want to close that cognitive loop and feel like we understand the world, and that the people that we've thought of in one certain way are still those people, and then that gets called into question. For instance, when they vote differently from us, or they take a different position on issues that are of great importance to us. And yeah, it's horrible to see what's happening to families right now.
It's just this.
It's
overwhelming.
So
I want to say.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say synergy. There's just sort of a negative sort of synergy.
Yeah, negative. Well, yeah, and actually, you saying that made me realize one of the things I wanted to mention is how contagious emotions are right now, and I think that really plays into a lot of what's going on. This sort of this collective negative experience that we're all in at the same time is anxiety. Negative emotions are incredibly contagious, and so it can be almost impossible to escape them when we're surrounded by them. And going back to how to manage the overwhelm, some of it is just removing those from yourself, or removing you from them. So
if possible,
if possible. So whether it's reducing your media consumption, your social media consumption, your broadcast media consumption, not being wired in 24/7 to the latest updates, which our brain wants, right? Our brain's like, give me all the negativity. I want to know what I'm up against. But in fact, that's not at all useful for managing the discomfort and the anxiety and the fear that we're all experiencing. So, so limiting our consumption of those ideas, limiting our exposure to people who we know are going to be very triggering to us. Unfortunately, that might be family. We're coming into the holidays. That's obviously going to be something that families are going to be navigating. I mean, on top of the fact that it's going to be very challenging to be in person for holidays for most people. Holidays often are just a very emotionally challenging time for people, brings a lot of old stuff up. So, decide. I think what we can do right now, what is within our control, is what we do with ourselves. And that's really all we have control over. So decide how it is that you want to show up for yourself. Decide how it is that you want to show up for your family, your friends, your job. Get really good on those boundaries. Cut out anything that you notice is creating more stress in your life that's not absolutely necessary. Obviously, there are some difficult things and, things that we don't like to do that maybe we have to do in order to, support our family and ourselves and get a paycheck. But just coming back to, lowering the bar and being okay with not being perfect, with not putting, a square meal on the table every night. That's okay.
Bowl of cereal is okay on pizza.
Absolutely.
So what I really heard you say, Christine, was that gain clarity. Really slow down and gain some clarity. That doesn't mean that you need to sit down for 3 days straight. It might be when you're taking a shower, right? Just taking and pausing and gaining that clarity. From that clarity, be intentional in what you want, who you want to be, and the relationships that you want to nurture, right? And then taking that and communicating in an effective way, right? Establishing those boundaries so that we can have the life that we, some semblance of the life that we want to live right now, communicating those boundaries. And that boundaries truly create respect. So I really love what you've been saying. Can you share who are, 2 or 3 of the most influential people in your life that's gotten you to this point?
Ooh. Well,
Or one.
Spot there. Brene Brown has been a huge one for me. So, all of her books have really helped me to understand that I carried a lot of shame around, not ever feeling like I could be enough. My fear of being vulnerable very much got in my way and continued to put me in situations that didn't serve me well because I was trying to prove things to myself and to other people rather than just admitting that I'm human. So, Brené's work has been deeply transformational to me. In terms of the workplace, I did spend part of my career in organizational leadership, and Adam Grant was a person who really helped me understand, he's an organizational behaviorist, and really it's about people, right? It's not about actually, it is about the balance sheet, but at the end of the day, if people aren't happy, if they're not feeling a sense of purpose around the work they're doing, if they don't have a sense of autonomy, if they don't feel valued, then the organization is not going to thrive. So I would say Adam Grant and Simon Sinek is another one. Start with why. What is the why of an organization? We can turn that internally. What is my why? That was very, very helpful for me. Figuring out what I wanted to be when I decided to become an entrepreneur. Really getting clear about my why, understanding that my why actually was the same as it was when I was practicing medicine. I was just implementing it differently and helping differently. That gave me the permission to evolve into the person I am today.
Would you have any advice for someone who wants to get into this field that you're in, to really start exploring? What would be their first step?
I think the first step is auditing one's current career and understanding their why, really. Let's go back to that. So why? There's this concept of a career love story, right? So what was it that brought you to your current career? For some people, it just sort of happened. They fell into it. For me, I had a deep love of medicine. And from an extremely young age, I wanted to go into medicine. I was in love with helping people. I was in love with the science. I loved everything about it. And then and then it almost killed me. And I had to develop a new relationship to that work after experiencing severe burnout. What helped me was working with a coach and understanding what are the components of my job that I love, that I like, that I'm tolerating, and what's not working. So kind of chunking it out and understanding that, and then looking, okay, what is it that I love? What is it that I really don't like a lot? And what is it about those things that don't work? Because so often we think the solution to professional dissatisfaction is to do something different. And oftentimes it's not the work, it's our relationship with it. And once we deconstruct that and, look at the pieces that really do resonate with us, where we feel like we're making a difference, where we feel that we can continue possibly to do it, and then learn some boundaries, decant off responsibilities that we don't need to be doing, that don't contribute to our workplace well-being, we may actually fall back in love with our work and be able to stay there. If that doesn't seem like a possibility, again, sort of looking at that audit that we've done of our current work, we can, start to do a little bit of exploration about other ways that we might be able to leverage our education, our experience, our skills, and what we love to do in the world in another field, and actually pivot to a different career.
Again, clarity, right? Just
It
really
all comes back to clarity, doesn't it?
all starts with clarity, definitely. And I'm noticing we're coming up on the hour pretty quickly here. So I just want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would have asked yourself?
Yeah, what can I do today to help reduce my anxiety? So one thing that I've been leaning on heavily, that's been helping me a lot when I can't turn my brain off. So this is often, at the end of the day when I'm lying in bed and I'm going a million miles a minute, is actually doing a progressive muscle relaxation exercise. So this has been shown to be very, very beneficial in turning off the brain and getting into the body and sort of doing that reset that you're talking about. The pattern interrupt. And it's basically just starting at the head and then working your way down to your feet or vice versa, and progressively tensing up the muscles, holding them tight, and then releasing them. That helps to bring our cortisol levels down, our adrenaline levels down. It slows things down. It promotes better sleep, and it is an antidote to anxiety.
All good stuff.
All good things. People can find online for free. There are scripts available that walk them through that.
Thank you for sharing that. I love the simplicity of it because, part of the topic really was taking, how can we regain the control? Because we're feeling so out of control, and just slowing down and being present in the moment and having that very simple tool that we don't have to go out and buy. We can do it anywhere, anytime. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm just looking to see if we have any other comments here.
Thank you for checking.
You're welcome. No, I think
I need
that up.
Okay, perfect. All right. So where can people find you if they want more information about your work and what you've got going on? Where's the best place for people to reach out to you?
My website is christineoneal.co. All one, no apostrophe, Christine O'Neal, just as you see it written here. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.
Great. Leora says, wonderful, of course. Wonderful and insightful. Thank you, ladies. Leora, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate all of you who have joined today, especially with that very struggle start that we had there, or I had trying to jump on. I was all super fuzzy and was like just vibrational. So I appreciate your patience, everyone who is watching. So next week, I'm interviewing Jen Fleckenstein from Clearwater Filtration. She's going to be talking about building a team and company culture. So very important. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Christine, for taking the time today, sharing your brilliance with everyone, especially these days. It is so needed, not just COVID, but everything that's going on in the world, and sharing some tools. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All
This
right.
has been great.
And as always, to your success, whatever that success is for you. Thank you, everyone.